How does a non-rational process create rationality? In other words, if our thoughts are purely the result of non-rational physical activities happening in the brain, then how can we trust our thoughts or truly know anything at all with any level of certainty? If every thought is simply the result of a chemical reaction, then we don't actually think at all. We just react. And chemical reactions don't care about truth. They don't aim for accuracy. They just happen. Welcome back to Campfire Apologetics, where I help equip the everyday Christian with tools to help them defend their faith in a hostile culture. I'm Mark Hudson, and today this should be a fun episode. This is kind of getting into the weeds of some like a topic that's a bit difficult to think about, or at least for me it was. But it's an episode that I've been thinking about doing this for a while now, and I just didn't know how to go about it. I just I just haven't been too sure of how to begin the subject because it just seems kind of odd on the surface, or at least not something that a lot of people really think about, or maybe they do, and I just don't hear people talking about it a whole lot. But I do think that this topic has pretty huge implications in regard to whether or not we live in a purely material universe, or if there is something else going on, and it's both a material and immaterial universe. So the question of today's episode is: are your mind and your brain the same thing, or are they completely different things? So I don't know if that's something you've thought about before, but now that I say it and you're listening, maybe you will. Many people might think that this isn't really an issue or a big deal. But one might only think that if they haven't given this topic much thought. If the mind is just the brain, if they're the same, then the materialist has a serious advantage. But if the mind is something more, something immaterial, the implications then, excuse me, the implications then would lean very heavily away from materialism and toward the Christian worldview, which would be a more of a dualist worldview that would say that there is material and also immaterial properties in the universe. So this topic was a bit challenging for me when I first came across really anything dealing with it. Uh, it didn't really seem like there were many theists that were addressing the materialistic assertions. And so I just thought that there wasn't really an answer for it, and Christians were simply avoiding it. But that's not the case at all. In fact, there are many Christian philosophers who have presented ideas and rebuttals to arguments for this question. So today, we're walking straight into the heart of the issue together. And I promise that by the end, you'll see why this is not just theoretical. This is about your identity. It's about your soul. It's about your ability to know truth and to know the image of God in you. And so I'll do my best to explain and to break down these ideas in this issue, because that's part of what I do on this channel. Is, again, it's trying to help the everyday Christian, the non formally educated Christian, the people that don't have time to go to school for theology or philosophy, or they don't have the resources to be able to do that. They don't have the money to be able to do that. Guys that have a job and you have a family and you still want to learn and you still have an interest in these things. And so I try to study these things to the best of my ability, and then I try to break them down and to help you grasp the ideas and help you understand them. So, what we should do is we should define some things because that is part of what is done in philosophy. When you're dealing with kind of deeper philosophical issues, part of doing philosophy is defining terms because you can't talk about stuff unless you know what it is that you're talking about. So let's define what the brain is. What is the brain? I mean, that might seem pretty obvious to some people, but the brain it's a physical organ that can be located in space and time. It's an organ in your skull, right up here. In case you didn't know that, where it was. It's not in your knee or your stomach. It is in your skull cavity, and it can be located, and we can see it. It's made of tissue and neurons, and it operates according to chemical and electrical processes. You can weigh it, and you can measure a brain, and you can even observe its activity through different medical scientific measures like MRIs. Okay, so we know that the brain is a physical thing. It's a material thing. It's an organ that exists in your head, and you can see it, and you could weigh it, you could touch it. I don't know that you would want to taste it, but I guess you could if we're just going through all the senses there. Just kidding. Don't mean to get creepy on you there, but let's define what we mean when we're speaking of the mind. The mind, unlike the brain, is immaterial. Now, some people might disagree with that. From my worldview, my presupposition, I'm telling you that I believe that is immaterial. You can't weigh it or locate it in space or time. For instance, you could say that the brain weighs 3 pounds, but it wouldn't make any sense to say that your thoughts and emotions weigh 3 pounds. And, a brain doesn't change its weight due to if somebody has more thoughts than another person. If I have more thoughts in my brain than my I don't know, my son has in his brain, it's not like my brain is going to weigh more just because I have more thoughts in it um, than his. So you can't weigh a thought. You can't put an emotion under a microscope. Your mind gives you concepts such as truth and justice, love and numbers and logic and whatever else, all kinds of other things, anything conceptual, uh, your mind gives you, right? These things don't have color, they don't have shape, they don't have density, they don't have weight. Those are all things that I already kind of touched on. They are immaterial realities. I think this distinction alone shows that the mind and the brain are different, that they are completely different things. This is why we can reason and why we can love and we can make moral judgments and we can have knowledge. We reflect the nature of our creator. And this is exactly what we should expect from creatures made in the image of God, which is what it says in Genesis 1:27. We are more than biological machines. If all we know is purely matter in motion, then our brain activity, such as thoughts and dreams and our reasoning faculties, are really just the result of physical material activities happening in the brain, which in turn would make the mind a material aspect of the brain. Now, if you followed any of my content or material or any other presuppositional line of thinking in the apologetic world, really for any period of time, you might already be picking up on some important assumptions or foundational issues to the assertion that the mind is the result of physical activities in the brain. If there is no distinction between mind and brain, you have no basis for trusting your reasoning at all. All activities in the brain, such as chemical reactions and electrical impulses, are non rational activities. Now, this poses an important and what I think a devastating question for the materialist. And that question is, how does a non rational process create rationality? In other words, if our thoughts are purely the result of non rational physical activities happening in the brain, then how can we trust our thoughts or truly know anything at all with any level of certainty? If every thought is simply the result of a chemical reaction, then we don't actually think at all. We just react. And chemical reactions don't care about truth. They don't aim for accuracy. They just they just happen. Now C.S. Lewis called this the argument from reason. He said if your thoughts are caused by chemistry instead of guided by truth, you have no basis for trusting your reasoning at all. Truth could not exist because truth would be the result of random events in your brain of and this would be going on in each individual person and would end up being subjective to each individual person. So if the materialist can't trust their reasoning, then they can't trust science or logic or morality or even the claim that materialism is true. So ironically, materialism undercuts itself. The way that your brain functions would really just lead you to one truth. And then the way that my brain functions would lead me to another truth. So there isn't any universal, there's no universality behind truth concepts from individual brain states. Truth is something that is true everywhere to all people. But if truth is localized to a personal individual mind, then that can't produce a universal truth. In which case, you really couldn't know truth. Truth wouldn't exist. Like the truth wouldn't actually exist. Now, the Bible gives us a foundation for this distinction. And it's not just a matter of an academic philosophical question, but also a matter of understanding who we are and whose image we are made in. It comes down to our very identity. Now, another issue for the materialist in regards to this distinction is that if there were no distinction between the mind and the brain, we should be able to remove someone's brain and extract their thoughts. So, like, if the brain were purely a physical machine like a computer, then in theory, we should be able to, read its thoughts simply by examining its physical structure. But we can't do this. Thoughts and ideas and dreams, consciousness, they're not reducible to physical properties of the brain like its weight, its shape, its size, its chemical composition, et cetera, and so on. This suggests that there is more to human cognition than just the physical brain. Let's get to some of the thoughts and objections pertaining to this issue because it gets really interesting. You can't just go with what I said there. You have to examine some of the things that people might say from the materialistic side of things. You have to hear maybe some of the arguments that they might make, some of the things that they might bring up. so that when you hear them, you're not thrown off, you're not surprised, and maybe you have an idea as to how you can respond. So one of the arguments I've come across that actually it honestly threw me through a little bit of a loop for a period of time when I first heard it, and it's the idea that the mind um, is altered after a traumatic brain injury. Uh, so you know, if the mind and the brain are different, if they're separate, then why is the mind affected by a physical or by physical damage to the brain? And I think this is probably one of the strongest objections to the idea that the mind and the brain are separate and that they're different and that one is material and one is immaterial. At least for me, it is. It's been a strong objection for me. I mean, that might be different for you. Maybe you hear that and you're like, oh, I know how to answer that right away. But for me, I had to think about it a little bit. Again, if the mind is immaterial, why is it affected by physical brain damage? Right. The mind is not the same as the brain, though. The brain is the vehicle through which the mind works. So consider this illustration. Someone could be a brilliant person. They speak fluently, like somebody like Albert Mueller. If you've ever listened to him, he has he has a podcast called The Briefing, and he just this man, he does not use a script. He doesn't use a manuscript. He doesn't use anything like that. He just taps into like four brains that he has, and he just speaks, and he can speak fluently about like anything. It's crazy. So take somebody like that, right? They speak without any fillers. They don't say like and like I do, a million times probably. They have all their motor functions. They live a completely normal life, an unimpeded life. But all of a sudden, they no longer have any of those abilities anymore. Once they have gotten into a bad car accident, the car accident caused brain trauma. And because of this trauma, their mind no longer seems to work as it once did. Now, wouldn't this be an indication that the brain and the mind are the same in a material sense? If not, why would the mind be affected at all by the damage done to the brain? Right? I thought this was a fair question. And for me, a hard one to answer. But just because you're stumped in the moment or you can't think of an answer doesn't mean that one doesn't exist. Thankfully, we live in an age of unlimited resources. And that's one thing to keep in mind. If somebody asks you something like this, if they ask you a tough question and it's something you're not familiar with and something you haven't really heard before, don't don't freak out. And this goes for anybody in any sense. Just say, I don't know. That's a good question. Um, I'm gonna have to go look into that. I'm gonna have to study that a little bit because it's not something I've really given any thought to. So I don't have much of an answer to give you. But it doesn't mean that there isn't an answer. It just means that you have to do some research and you have to dig into it to be able to come back to it. And that's totally fine. And I think it shows intellectual humility. You're not just trying to shoot from the hip and make something up. You want to respect people enough to say, I don't know, let me find out. So that's totally fine, right? But think of it this way, right? You're driving your car and you get into a really bad accident. And let's say the car is unrecognizable. They have to use the jaws of life to pull you out of that thing because it is a crumbled mess. It's a soda can that is just smashed, and there's no way that any repairs can be done to this car. There's no way it can be driven again. But somehow you miraculously walk away with no injuries. Now we see this kind of thing from time to time, so it's not completely crazy of an idea or of a thought experiment. You're fine, but your ability now to get around in your car has forever been impacted. Your car will never be able to get you to where you need to go it, anymore, not in the future. You're going to have to get a new car, right? In this example, the car is the brain and you, the driver, are the mind. The brain is the vehicle in which the mind works. But if the vehicle is severely altered, then the passenger of the vehicle isn't going to be able to drive and operate the car the way that they need to drive and operate. Now, there's definitely instances where the person doesn't walk away unscathed, but that wouldn't therefore conclude that the car and the person were the same thing or that they're not separate entities. The brain is the physical interface through which the mind interacts with the body and the external world. So that means that changes in the brain can alter the mind's ability to express itself. It doesn't mean the mind is identical to the brain. We use the car accident as an example. Another illustration could be something like when somebody has a stroke. When somebody suffers a stroke, their ability to speak or move it is impaired, or it might be impaired. This does not mean that their thoughts or their personality have ceased to exist or that they're even different or that they've changed or been altered. It just means that the instrument, being the brain through which they express themselves, has been damaged. Or take an amazing musician, a world renowned musician of some sort. Maybe their guitar or their trumpet or whatever instrument they have, maybe that thing gets severely damaged in transit while they're traveling, whatever the case may be. Instruments damaged, and they have nothing else for the concert that they're going to. They're in some weird area somewhere in the world, and they can't get a new instrument. They can't borrow one. I don't know. It's just a thought experiment, right? But so the music isn't going to come out the same way as when their instrument was in good working condition. When their instrument was in perfect condition, it's going to sound completely different than when it's damaged. But the musician themselves, they still have all of the same skill that they had before. It's just that when they use that skill on that broken instrument, it doesn't come out the same way. Ultimately, these examples of accidents or suffering, really, they remind us of the effects of sin on creation. The fall has brought brokenness and corruption and sickness into the world, affecting both our minds and our bodies. Romans 8:20 through 23 says, "For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to corruption and obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation has been groaning together in the pains of childbirth until now. And not only the creation, but we ourselves, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for adoption as sons, the redemption of our bodies." So, um, I guess moving on to another fun idea or thought experiment, or argument against the immaterial mind, is the idea that a person is their brain. Um, that a person is actually like their brain, and their being and personality are one and the same. And this runs hand in hand with the idea that the brain is purely a material object and that there's no distinction between the brain and the mind. So, is a person their brain? Is the core of a person their brain? The materialist holds to this position most of the time. They will anyway. Maybe not all of them, but for the most part, this is something that they would believe. Now, assume this scenario for argument's sake. A person can actually live with one half of their brain, and this is due to neuroplasticity. Imagine a mad scientist takes your brain and they split it down the middle into two different hemispheres. He takes the two halves and he implants each one into two different human bodies. Neither one of those bodies that he implanted those halves of the brain are your original body. Okay, so he removes your brain out of your original body. You have body A over here, you have body B over here. He puts one half of your brain in body A and he puts one half of your brain in body B. Okay, now which of the resulting humans would be you? Would it be both? How could two people be you? You'd be living two separate lives with two conscious existences. Okay, that so maybe just one of them is you, but which one? That would be arbitrary. Why are you person A and not person B, or person B and not person A? What if neither one of them is you? If one of those halves of the brain stayed in your original body, it would be assumed that the original body is you. So all possible outcomes are problematic. All of them, they give you major problems. This would suggest that the original assumption that your brain is you, or that you are your brain, is false. You are not your brain. Your personal identity is not reducible to tissue. This thought experiment is devastating, I think, to materialism and incredibly supportive of dualism. Again, that's the idea that there's the material and the immaterial, that you have a material brain and an immaterial mind. Um, Now, thought experiments are fun because we can run through different scenarios, and even difficult scenarios and thoughts without having to actually perform the experiment. So luckily we could think about that experiment without actually having to cut into somebody's brain and excuse me. Luckily we could do that. We can do this thought experiment without actually having to cut into somebody's head and cut their brain in half and separate them and put them into uh, you know two different bodies. So that would be a really crazy experiment just for a philosophical thought. But Scripture consistently makes the distinction between the body and the mind, the soul, or the spirit. The Bible provides clear evidence that the mind or soul is distinct from the body and continues to exist when the body is no longer functioning. For example, Scripture teaches that when a believer dies, their soul departs to be with the Lord. Their soul separates and leaves their body stays in the grave. 2 Corinthians 5:8. Yes, we are of good courage, and we would rather be away from the body and at home with the Lord. Philippians 1:23. I am hard pressed between the two. My desire is to depart and be with Christ, for that is far better. Passages like these demonstrate that the soul is dependent on the brain for its existence. In Luke 16:19 through 31, Jesus describes the rich man and Lazarus as being conscious after death. I'm pretty comfortable saying I trust Jesus, who created all things, rather than secular scientists who hold to the position that they aren't sure they even know anything or have the ability to reason in any meaningful way. And this is where I talk about what I like to bring up a good bit. I bring it up all the time, and that is epistemology. Again, that is the study of knowledge. How do you know what you know? What is your ultimate source of knowledge and truth? And this is important because, like I've said in the past many times, the Christian has knowledge because God, in his infinite knowledge, has revealed to his creation things that we can know, and that's how we can know anything. So I trust the word of God and the infinite all-knowing mind of God to know anything. I don't trust my feelings or arbitrary reasoning capabilities or non-rational and random chemical reactions in my skull. It all has to be filtered through God's revelation. As we have seen, trusting in a purely physical brain with no distinction from the mind leads to all of humanity not being able to truly know anything at all or trust our reasoning abilities. We can trust God's revelation because God is the foundation for truth and reason and the immaterial mind itself. Without an immaterial mind created by an immaterial God, truth collapses, knowledge collapses, identity collapses, morality collapses, everything collapses. Materialism can't even justify its own existence. This is more than just a philosophical debate. This is about who you are. And who you are can only be found in Christ. You are more than your brain. You are more than electrical impulses. tissue and chemical reactions. You are a created human with a soul made in the image of God. This is why you long for truth and meaning. This is why you love and care deeply about your relationships. This is why you use reason to think deeply about life's issues. This is why you can know God and you can be known by Him. And that's why your story doesn't end in the grave. You are either in covenant relationship with Christ or with Adam. And if you remain in Adam, your existence after your death, after your body stops working, after your body is laid to rest in the grave, it will be separated from the very source of all that which is good. Things like love and beauty and relationships and good music and good food. Everything you know that is good, you will no longer know, you will no longer experience. And this is why turning to Christ is the only thing that can give you meaning. It's the only thing that can give you eternal and everlasting life. And so if you don't know Christ, call on Christ, pray to him, ask him to reveal himself to you. Truly turn to him. Step into who you actually are in the way that you can actually know what that is. So I hope this episode was interesting. I hope you learned something and maybe gained some information, and maybe you can go out and have an interesting conversation with somebody about the brain and the mind. And so um, I thought it was an interesting topic. I've always thought it was an interesting topic, and it's something I've wanted to talk about, but I didn't want to really talk about it until I felt that I had a better handle on it and a better grasp and understanding. I don't want to try to talk about something that I don't at least know something about. And so as always, brothers and sisters, thank you for watching and listening, whichever way you consume the content. But remember to always be ready to give a reason for the hope that is in you, and to do that with love and respect. And I will see you next time. Thank you so much. And in case this is the last episode before Christmas, I don't know if it will be or not, but just in case it is, uh, Merry Christmas, or Happy New Year, and all those things. I don't think this will be the last one, but I don't think I said it on the other one that might come before this. So whichever way you want to look at it, Merry Christmas. And I'll see you soon. All right, thanks.